This is Risky Women Radio, a show to connect, celebrate and champion women in risk, regulation and compliance, sharing insight and perspective from the most influential members of our global Risky Women network on the latest developments we need to think about, the challenges we should all talk more about, and the innovation we are most excited about in governance, risk and compliance. Bringing together the hundreds of senior women professionals already connected with a new emerging group of leading women and men. I'm Kimberly Cole, your Chief Risky Woman. This episode is brought to you by our founding sponsor, Refinitiv. Refinitiv serves more than 40,000 institutions in over 190 countries. Refinitiv provides information, insights and technology that drive innovation and performance in global financial markets. Refinitiv enables the financial community to trade smarter and faster, overcome regulatory challenges, and scale intelligently. Welcome to Risky Women Radio. Today's Risky Woman is Sian Lewin, who is the Head of Client Delivery and Research at RegTech Associates. She's also the founder of RegTech Women Network. She's an expert in financial regulation and change management professional. She's over 20 years of experience managing regulatory change for large financial institutions. In 2017, she was awarded a PhD from the London School of Economics. Her systematic research explored the challenges that banks face in dealing with the volume and speed of regulatory change following the 2008 financial crisis. She's on the Women in FinTech Power List for 2018. But I want her to tell us a bit more about her career journey. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on Risky Women Radio. I'm really excited to be here. So I think my career, if you look at it backwards, looks like it makes an awful lot of sense. But if you look at it forwards, things just happen by chance and serendipity. And I just took some risks. So I started my career in the city working for ING Bearings, just after the collapse. And my first role ever was trying to implement a set of global minimum control standards across the organisation. So I got to see all sorts of things. From there, I did various large programmes, such as the introduction of the euro, working on Y2K. I was out in New York for a couple of years. And I came back, moved into management consulting, and that's where I really came across regulation for the first time in the good old days of Basel II. I worked for both Deloitte and Accenture, trying to implement all the changes associated with that huge piece of regulation. And that's really been what my career consisted of up until 2009, when I decided to do a master's in regulation at the LSE. Went back into industry, but couldn't quite let my academic mind and critical thinking go. So I decided to embark on a PhD, which took 4 years full time. Really worthwhile thing to do. And I emerged kind of blinking into the sun in 2017, figuring out what I was going to do. I'd uncovered a lot of the problems and challenges in dealing with regulation as part of that process. And I came across this thing called RegTech, the promise of new and innovative technology to solve some of those problems. And that's what I've been working on ever since. Jason, my co-founder, and I have been running RegTech Associates for a couple of years. We're having a ball.
Excellent. And I think you're known as the Reg Doctor. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's a little cheeky name I call myself, but it gets a little bit confusing because my husband is called Reg. So according to him, I'm the Reg Doctor rather than the Reg Doctor.
So tell us a bit more about your PhD, because I think it's really interesting. You're obviously looking at the volume and the speed of regulatory change, which hasn't decreased. What were some of the key findings, and what has that helped you in terms of how you're advising customers? So
the main focus was the fact that the enormous amount and speed of regulatory change creates enormous amounts of uncertainty for regulated firms. And they somehow have to deal with that uncertainty as well as implementing what they need to do to be compliant with those new regulations. So there's a tension between the level of certainty and the level of compliance that they can achieve. And we're talking about large organizations that are not just a monolithic whole. They have different types of logics and different teams and different silos and different objectives as well. So they have the objective to be compliant, but they also have the objective to be profitable and deliver shareholder value. And sometimes those two come into conflict and are quite difficult to reconcile unless you try and align those objectives by finding ways in which being regulatory compliant can actually impact the bottom line in a positive way. I think one of the other things that was really clear to me is that the point of a lot of this regulation is to not just tick the box in terms of compliance, but it's about trying to change behaviour. And if the goalposts are always changing because the regulators are continually producing new rules or amending rules, then it's very difficult then to embed that regulation and that culture of compliance within an organisation. And I don't know now whether that's changed, but that was certainly my findings back in 2013-14 when I did the research.
That's great. And before we sort of dig into that a bit more deeply and get on to more around RegTech, because this is a great sort of lead in, we're trying to do a bit of a RegTech series. And so I'm very keen to get into a bit more detail. But I also want to cover the fact that you started or you founded RegTech Women's Network, which obviously here at Risky Women, we love another women's network. So tell us more about what inspired you to form that network and about the network itself.
As I mentioned, I kind of started working in RegTech in about 2017. And I was doing two things. One, I was going along to a lot of events, hearing a lot of people speaking about RegTech. But I was also meeting people who are working in the industry. And there seemed to be a mismatch between some of the amazing women I met, you know, through working in the industry and the people who were talking about the industry. And I felt, well, this doesn't quite match up. There's a huge amount of talent here that's not being heard. And I thought, well, let's get together and try and fix that. So I set up an advisory board last December. We're still fairly nascent, but always wanting to attract new members. We had our launch event in February. And we really focused on empowering women, celebrating our success, collaborating across the industry, because I believe achieving good levels of compliance and doing the right thing in the industry can only be achieved through collaboration. And we also want to nurture and promote, you know, the emerging talent in the industry and make sure that people have, well, girls, women, have role models that they can look up to who are successful in both not just technology, but also all the other skills that are needed to build successful companies and become compliant.
Brilliant. That's exactly, I'd say, very aligned to what Risky Women is also trying to do, connecting, celebrating and championing women in risk regulation and compliance. And this podcast hopes to help some of those emerging women and men in the industry as well. So it's great to have you here sharing your knowledge and expertise. So you were talking about your PhD. You were telling us about, you know, what you sort of saw back in 2008 and how you have started to use that. What do you think is the state of the market now in terms of the level of regulatory challenges and problems? I
think in terms of regulatory change, we've seen a huge wave or a few waves of change. The prudential regulation change first, then MiFID II. Had some other changes in terms of GDPR. So I think a lot of the large-scale transformations are complete, but that's not the end of the story because the regulators continue to amend and change rules on a piecemeal basis. And that, I like to call it tinkering around the edges, creates similar amounts of uncertainty, but it's actually harder to implement and make those changes for large organizations because they don't get management attention. They don't get huge investment program budgets. They have to be done as part of business as usual when people are already busy. So I think that's a huge change since I did my research. The focus of attention, I think, has moved slightly from compliance to back to profit making. I think the regulatory expectations and levels of enforcement are themselves dropping as well. I only have anecdotal evidence to back that up. So I think the market has moved, but I think it's giving regulated firms the opportunity to pause a little bit and think, well, how can we do this better? How can we deal with this regulation better, more efficiently, at lower cost? and reducing our risk at the same time. And I think that's where technology comes in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to raise next, was what are some of the solutions that you're seeing?
So at RegTech Associates, we have a really wide view of the market. I think we currently are tracking about 600 different RegTech products across 10 different categories. I'm going to try and remember them, but I might not be successful. So financial crime is by far our largest category. And we're seeing a lot of use of AI and machine learning in terms of fraud detection, transaction monitoring. There's some really exciting products that we're working with in that area. Regulatory change management and intelligence is also a growing and more competitive category. We're seeing regulated firms really wanting help with mapping their obligations to their risks, policies and controls. And then when things change, be able to factor that into that process. I think it's fair to say that there's no one platform or solution that can do all of that. So it's a matter of picking the best of breed that can do bits of that life cycle and somehow attaching them together. Some of the other areas where some fascinating technology is emerging are things like data privacy. So the FCA recently ran a tech sprint on looking at privacy-enhancing technologies to allow the sharing of data between organisations for purposes such as fraud and fighting financial crime, which I think shows an awful lot of promise. When you're looking at 600 products, there's always some that spring to mind. The other area that I'm quite fascinated in, having a slightly capital markets background, is the area of market surveillance and the use of behavioural science in market surveillance, the use of AI, what else you can get from all of that data. So there's some great providers out there who bring all of your trade, all of your market data, all of your customer data, all of your transactional data together to surface insights and patterns and so on that you wouldn't necessarily have seen. And that's not just for compliance. That's actually to start thinking about your cost per transaction, which customers are doing what, when, to help relationship managers and so on. So there's some really good thinking around how we can use some of these solutions not only to, yes, achieve compliance, but deliver other benefits on top of that.
And I think I saw you did a wonderful kind of infographic that sort of displayed all of those different potential solutions.
Yeah, so we have different market maps per category. So we've just refreshed our financial crime market map, which is a bit of a beast to manage, because as with all these things, there isn't just one product that does one thing. They span a number of different categories. So we work very hard to make sure that we're reflecting things accurately. And what we love is that we get quite a lot of interaction on social media when we share those and say, our product's not in there, can you add it? So we get help. We're kind of crowdsourcing our view of the RegTech market in some respects.
Well, we should definitely put a link into the show notes for that, because yes, it was the financial crime one that I saw. I thought it was very interesting. So we're talking about the sort of positive, solutions and way things are changing. Are you seeing, though, that there's any unintended consequences with either some of the solutions or just the focus on technology and what that means for compliance?
I think we do have to be careful with any kind of technology. There are always risks associated with it. I think with RegTech in particular, there's a couple that spring to mind. One is, if we automate the entire end-to-end process of managing regulation, of change, of compliance, it changes where liability sits if things go wrong. For example, if the regulator starts producing regulation in code and that automatically feeds into, say, a bank's systems, affects changes without human intervention, if that code is wrong in the first place, where does the liability for a compliance breach actually sit? And I think more importantly, and this comes back to more ethical issues, if we are outsourcing everything to technology to achieve compliance, we have a tendency to outsource responsibility as well, and we can't, we mustn't. We must always have humans in the loop. We must always have the application of human judgment, because this is about affecting behavioural change. It's not about just ticking a compliance box. And I think there's the danger of that tipping over.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. You've also written several articles on risk and regulatory change, from what is the new normal and looking through the reg crystal ball. You also wrote a fantastic one, I thought, on sociological thinking and how this can help address financial misconduct. So getting in a bit more into those behavioural elements that I guess that you mentioned just then. What are the important themes for you and ones that you sometimes think are overlooked?
One of the things that's overlooked is this idea of people reproducing their own behaviour and their own background. There's a social theorist called Pierre Bourdieu, and he talks about us having a particular habitus, which isn't just, your background where you've been brought up. It's actually embodied in you and how you carry yourself, how you dress, the things you're interested in. And we have a tendency, I think, through our own heuristics and biases, to stick with people who are like us and are not going to be different. And I think that inability to accept difference and diversity can be really damaging. If you look at some of the investigations, for example, into the FX scandal and the libel scandal, and you start reading some of the chat messages and the communications, it was almost tribal, and there's no diversity within that tribe. And I don't just mean gender and race, I mean diversity of thinking, of background, of education, of class. I think all of those things are really critical to stop this kind of herd mentality and this acceptance of behaviour that in other situations or in other parts of society wouldn't be deemed as normal.
Yeah, so it was the interconnectedness of that network as well, wasn't it? It was very interesting. I think I will try to put some of the links into those articles that you wrote on that, because I did think they were fascinating.
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
It took me a bit to remember what I'd written.
And what are the main areas where you see that RegTech is really having a strong impact now?
It's quite difficult to say, because I think it's actually a market that's not yet in equilibrium. I think there is a real desire to embrace it on the side of the regulated firms, and there are some brilliant solutions out there. But the adoption of RegTech just isn't happening at a speed that I would like to see. And I think that's for a whole host of reasons. I think you've got, these large cruise ships of the regulated firms and these nimble little racing yachts. And they come from, talking about diversity, they come from two different places. So I think the large regulated firms, they have lengthy procurement processes. You have to get on the preferred supplier list. They're quite risk averse in their take up of technology. You're also fighting against internal technology teams who want to build things rather than buy them. I think there's a recognition in parts of the organisations that they really need technology to help them. But then there's a slight suspicion as well. And on the side of the RegTech vendors, I think what we're seeing is an overpromise of their capabilities in some cases, a lot of marketing, and because they haven't been properly tested, they can't really prove the things that they're saying in their marketing. And I think this creates an atmosphere of mistrust, really, which is a real shame. And so one of the things we're trying to do at RegTech Associates is break through this, what we call the fog of innovation, and really try and connect the buyers and sellers together in a way that solves problems and helps the financial industry become safer.
Excellent. And what are those kind of most exciting areas, or where you're seeing that the biggest difference maybe will, progress?
I would really like to see the biggest difference happen in financial crime. I mean, I think if we think about all the areas of regulation, this is the one that has huge amounts of societal impact and harm, from people being trafficked to human slavery to criminal gangs. And I think we forget sometimes that that's the purpose of anti-money laundering regulation and so on, is to stop that harm from happening. And there are some brilliant firms out there using artificial intelligence and machine learning to spot the bad guys, using things like link analysis to make those connections between different transactions, different customers. There are some great fraud detection solutions out there as well that are doing similar things, and are starting to hold huge amounts of data that can say, well, that IP address, that is the IP address of a known fraudster. And if you start connecting that to other customers, to specific types of mobile device, for example, that can surface patterns of fraud that, older technologies can't. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that the promise is amazing. Is there any potential that there's a risk, though, of over-reliance on technology?
I think it depends, which is always a prevaricating answer. I think there's still a room for human judgment. I think what technology can do is help and support those human judgments and human intelligence rather than replace it. If you're automating mundane processes that take a lot of time, that then frees people up to do the difficult stuff and focus on the 1% of things that aren't going to be caught by technology, to deal with the difficult investigations, to deal with the situations that require face-to-face conversations and negotiation, which I don't think computers are quite ready to do. But I think it's got to be a combination of human and machine intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the next big risk or uncertainty that you think that the market should be thinking about or preparing for?
I'm going to say climate risk.
Yeah.
I really think that needs to get some serious attention, and that's not one I think that artificial intelligence can necessarily solve. It'll be interesting to see what kind of technology solutions come up as part of that, and not necessarily just in the financial services industry, but more broadly in society.
Excellent. That's some really interesting insights there, I think, into what's happening with RegTech, what firms should be thinking about, and what, perhaps the opportunities are, but also some of the challenges. So thank you for that. And we'll definitely include some of the links to those articles for our listeners as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So on to Rants and Revelations. Connecting, celebrating and championing women in risk, regulation and compliance, Rescue Women Radio takes an intimate look at the rants and revelations of the top women shaping the debate and the industry. Bit of fun. What's your top piece of advice, as we talked about, mentoring and helping the next generation, that you think helped you as you progress through your career, that you would pass on?
It's actually a piece of advice that's been given to me fairly recently. And the advice is just to allow things to feel easier. And it's made a huge difference to me. I've always wanted to get everything 100% perfect, do everything in a hurry, be busy, and actually allowing things to feel easier and approach things with a kind of a calmer mentality and I could do this frame of mind has really made a difference to me. And it's very subtle, but I would absolutely say to anyone who's really struggling with, wanting to get everything done and being busy, just allow things to feel easier, and they will.
Yeah, be a bit kinder to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if your rant now, so what's the one thing that if you were the ruler of the world for the day and you had a magic wand and you could wave it to change and fix, what would that be? I
think it would be inequality of all sorts. I'm actually reading The Handmaid's Tale at the moment, a bit of a slow one to get to grips with that. And that's frightening, a frightening dystopia that actually doesn't seem too far away. But not just, gender inequality, but wealth inequality, the poorest and the richest, and even within firms, the disparity of pay between the chief execs and the other workers. I think there's enough in the world already. It's just not distributed properly, and that's unfortunately a matter of politics and entrenched interests. I could rant forever about this.
We seem to be able to get people to rant forever, but inequality, that's an admirable, change that, yes, I wish you did have the magic wand to enable that change. Now, our rapid fire round. Risky Women is a vibrant network at the centre of a global community in a rapidly growing, evolving and influential industry. Given the continued pace of change, our rapid fire round revisits the most pressing topics to share ideas
Are you ready?
and offer listeners new
One word to
perspectives.
describe the world of governance, risk and compliance.
Sexy.
Sexy. Wow. We obviously all need to go and speak more to RegTech Associates. Your cure for the cost of compliance and the wave of regulatory change that we continue to see.
Ooh, that's a really hard question. That's not very rapid, is it? I think being thoughtful.
Fair enough. And are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutral in your outlook for the year ahead?
I'm optimistic.
Oh, good.
I was pessimistic earlier on, but I've got a bit of hope back now, I think, especially after the news today.
Very good. And a bit more fun now, a book that you would recommend that everyone reads.
I'm going to still say what I was thinking in my head, and it sounds a bit pretentious, and it's quite hard to read. But I read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason when I was at university, and it's really changed the way that I see and understand the world at quite a deep level. So that's my pretentious answer for the day.
And something to watch?
I've been watching Billions recently and I love it.
Oh, yes, yes.
It's almost like work. So,
And what about your favourite podcast?
Risky Women.
Oh, of course, of course. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Sian Lewin, for joining us today and sharing your expert opinion on so many areas, especially related to RegTech. It's been brilliant. And thank you for joining us on Risky Women Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, we're always looking for sponsors, and if you'd like to get involved and help celebrate and champion women in risk regulation and compliance, please get in contact at info@riskywomen.org. We'd love to have you join the show. Thank you for listening to this exciting episode of Risky Women Radio to connect, champion and celebrate women in risk regulation and compliance. I'm Kimberly Cole, based in Hong Kong. For more information on the Risky Women Global Network, head to our website in the episode notes, and please be a part of the ongoing conversation by subscribing to this podcast, connecting with us at Risky Women on Twitter, or even reaching out to me directly by email.